Hey, everybody, this is Drew Burdick with another episode of the Building Great Experiences podcast. With me, I've got my friend, John Espey, who is CEO at Defiance Digital. John and I, a couple years ago, met up through a mutual friend, and we became fast buddies, have had a lot of good conversations over the
Quite
years.
the bromance.
Yeah, quite the bromance. That's right. But super excited I'm having the mix. This is going to be a two-parter. So we're going to do part one. We're going to talk about the impact of infrastructure on great customer experiences. And then part two, we're going to talk about something that both he and I have experienced, which is the transition from corporate life to entrepreneurship. So John, welcome to the show, man. So you shared a lot of your story and kind of background. You mentioned obviously like you don't have a ton of time in corporate America, but you've seen corporate from different vantage points. You've also worked with a lot of different folks. So let's talk a little bit about like what it looks like when someone moves from corporate into entrepreneurship. I just went through this process myself, so it's very fresh for me. Yeah, like I think there's a lot of folks looking, kind of zooming out for a minute. It's election day. We're recording here on election day. Lots of things have been happening over the last year or so. Who knows what's going to happen over the next 12 months. Many people have been affected by layoffs. Many people are kind of frustrated with their current working position or situation. They've got skills and abilities. They're considering taking a leap. Would love to kind of spend some time talking about what are the pros and cons, what makes it, what makes something a good idea, and like what are some of the considerations people should think about?
Yeah, no, there's a lot there to talk about. I think that first of all, one thing I've been exposed to very often throughout my career is hiring people who have come from a bigger system, and I think it's a two-edged sword. I'll put it that way. I think that it can be very liberating coming out of a corporate environment. For a variety of reasons. One of the biggest reasons is that I think that the cost of questioning things in a corporate environment is inherently high. Most people don't want to be questioned. If your boss knows the answer that she wants ahead of time, and if you don't give that answer, you might not be looking for a new job, but you might be getting reassigned to a worse project, right? Yeah. And I think that's probably the part that excites most people about coming to a smaller company is, we don't have bureaucracy and process and the bad side of what comes from bureaucracy and process. But it's a two-edged sword. I've seen people who have thrived in an environment that is a very, very strong environment. Think IBM, Accenture. I'd put Slalom in that category. Much smaller scale than those other guys, but I think it's very easy to lose sight of the good side of what those kind of resources offer. And so where I've seen people struggle is really along kind of two main fronts, I'd say. One front is, what do you mean I got to put the slide deck together? I have somebody to do that. Well, you don't anymore. You're in a startup.
You don't got an analyst. You got to do it yourself.
Yeah, you got to do it yourself. You want a spreadsheet? Great, make it. And that can be hard. And there's other examples too. If you've worked for an IBM or a Bank of America. Bank of America is a great example. We hired a lot of people at level who came from Bank of America or Wells Fargo, and those institutions, Bank of America has a relationship with 25% of America, right? Wow. Bank of America thinks about channel a little bit differently than you or I would think about channel, because Bank of America is a channel. They touch 25% of America. So they're inherently in every single conversation that matters in the things that they do. And when you go to a smaller startup, you're just not going to have that seat at that table. Now, I think that you can still be very productive, and you can sit at tables that Bank of America may not be invited to, just because there are conversations going on that they aren't. But I think for a lot of people leaving an organization like that, or leaving an IBM where they've got a relationship with
Yep.
probably every Fortune 500 business,
Yep.
maybe every Fortune 2000 business too. It's a little bit different selling when you've got that kind of support.
You got the backing of the global brand behind you, right?
Exactly. And so the other thing I would tell people is, and there's a big difference between going to a true startup or going out on your own and starting your own company like you've done, versus maybe going and working for an earlier stage company that isn't in 25% of American households, right?
Right.
I just think that there's a little bit of a culture shock that can come
Totally.
with that from time to time.
Yeah, I think so. Speaking from my own experience, this is my second stint as an entrepreneur, and I remember the first time around. Those who listen, they probably heard the story, but I'll give the highlights. Had a company, working myself to the bone, 80 to 100 hours a week, just crazy hours. Burned out hard. My daughter's born, trying to figure out what to do. Text some buddies. I'm like, I don't even know if I'm employable.
Yeah.
Get it. They're like, hey, yeah, we think you could get a job. Apply, interview, get a job within 3 days. And I'm like, oh my God, okay, this is happening. It was crazy because the transition from entrepreneurship to corporate, it was I went from working 80 to 100 hours a week to 50 hours a week.
Yep.
And, people are like, oh, 50 hours. I was like, this is a vacation. This is amazing. I'm like,
yeah.
You mean I don't have to worry about payroll? I don't have to go
HR?
Yeah,
nothing.
None of this stuff. I can just show up and get paid. And so, having gone through that transition, there's definite pros for working from somebody else, right? Because you don't have to worry about all the administration. You don't have to worry about where's the money going to come from. If stuff goes sideways, you still got a job unless you really mess it up. And the other thing too, what was really valuable in my experience with the corporate world was you get to interact and mingle with people that you wouldn't otherwise mix and mingle with, right? I've had the privilege and the honor of being able to work alongside some super smart people that I know if I had kept doing what I was doing, in my early 20s, probably never would have met them, probably never would have had those experiences. Also, I think, talk about seat at the table. When you have a backing of a bigger company, I mean, I've been to the table with big CEOs from Fortune 500s that I never would have met those people. I know for a fact.
Yep.
Little
well, and
me.
even still, you still are leveraging that at StealthX,
right,
because of the background
exactly
that you have there.
Yep. And so now going back into entrepreneurship, it is hard because I'm having to go pound the pavement myself to get every dollar. But yeah, I've found it very helpful to say, okay, I have these relationships, I've built these this network, I've got this expertise and experience. It's a whole lot easier to say, hey, I came from there.
Yep.
I've been there, done that with these big companies. People are like, oh, okay, well, if they worked with you and they found you valuable, whatever, let's talk, right?
Yeah.
And so it definitely there's advantages and disadvantages. I've worked, with people, and I'm sure you have too, founders who they've never worked for anybody, and there's this misconception with entrepreneurs, oh, I'm unemployable. I was that guy. I'm like, I can't be employed by anybody.
Sure.
But what I found was the entrepreneurial mindset, you can crush it in corporate because you're you get it. You got the owner mindset where you're like, I can just do the thing,
Yeah. Well, you're like the runner who lives in Denver and doesn't realize the inherent advantage of training 1 mile up in thinner air, and then you go breathe the oxygen in Chicago, and you're like, wow, this is so much easier. Right? I mean, I think you raise a very good point, and that's the it's kind of an asymmetric thing, right? I think it's hard for most people when they go from a corporate environment to a startup. But it's hard when you go to the gym. It's hard when you do a lot of things, right?
Choose your heart,
you
right?
can get through it. Yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
But I think it's relatively easier to mix back in because the challenges that you face and whether you're the one who started the company or you're somebody who's coming to work at it, obviously it's a different experience, but some of the concepts are the same. It still requires a little more thinking on your feet. It requires a little bit more resourcefulness because maybe you don't have the budget to do the things that you want to do. And those skill sets, they transfer for sure. Now, Could Elon Musk be as productive as an employee of GM as he is as CEO of Tesla? Probably not. But would he be the best employee GM had if he's motivated? And he could probably sleepwalk through it, right?
Yeah, right.
So, but the part that I think one of the harder things for people who make the transition, and this is I don't want to sound cynical, I don't want to sound mean when I say this, but I think a lot of people like the idea of being able to blame somebody else for their own shortcomings. And again, I don't mean that as bad as it sounds, but I think there is some comfort that you can take from saying, you know what, I just did what I was told.
Yeah.
And you lose that when you go out on your own or when you go work with a small group of people. It's if you mess up, it's your fault. And a lot of people don't like that. I think nobody likes it the first time it happens, and the first time you realize it, you're like, "Oh shit! Wow!
Yeah.
Like,
it's my fault.
Yeah,
I did it.
Like, hopefully you never have to do layoffs. I've had to do layoffs before, and there's nothing more humbling than that. And you realize your own shortcomings, and that this is my fault. I could have stopped this and I didn't. But I think that like anything, like the first time you go to the gym and you get out of breath and you lose control of your breath work and you feel like you're going to fall over and die, that's horrible. But you realize 2 or 3 times after that happens, that can be avoided and you learn how to deal with it. And I think that's the part that made it so easy for you to jump back into corporate, because you had gotten smacked in the face. You had seen that, hey, I'm the one, I have nobody to blame but myself for this. But I do think that that's a struggle for a lot of people when they first go out on their own.
Yeah, I think it's a lot of it is mindset, like I said, that choose your hard thing. It's a quote that's been going around a lot. I think it's a really important piece. I wrote on a sticky note as I quit my last job, the 4 things. My why was I wanted more freedom, more fun, more flexibility, and less kind of BS in politics. And it's hard to do that. It's hard to make time and space for fun and to be, to not become entrapped by your own, thing, right? Making something that now you're trapped by. And, you have to pick, like, am I going to do the hard thing of like navigating organizational dynamics and, helping influence and get these people to do these things and leading this team and whatever. Or am I going to go try to like sweat this out on my own and figure this out? Like, it's hard either way. You just pick which path you want. And I'm also a big believer in this idea of like this notion of seasons, right? Like life is seasons, and I think sometimes in America, especially 10 years ago, there's this big like hustle culture movement, and it was like, everybody was kind of focusing on, hey, you got to get out there, you got to do the thing and whatever. And I don't think that that's true. I don't think it's sustainable to kind of just be like, I'm an entrepreneur forever and always. Like I'm never going to work for the man. I'm never going to do the thing.
Sure.
And I've learned never say never, right? I never thought I'd live in America. I never thought I was going to get married, have kids. Like, never thought I'd work corporate. Here I am. I've done all those things. And
yeah, it's very easy for us to try to treat everything as linear or following a path. And I think you're right. I think there's a gentleman here in town who started a company called My Next Season, which he helps people transition from one season to the next, because he was a very high-ranking banking official during the meltdown.
Oh yeah.
And
so he knows seasons.
He got done and he said, well, what do I want to do next? And so he started doing consulting to help people, like, this is your next season. And I think that's very important. I think that, boxing yourself in and saying what I am today is what I'm always going to be is probably never a great idea, but it's something, unfortunately, we all do, because we all do think linearly. Like, if things are getting better right now, they're going to keep getting better and at the same rate. And
I'll just keep doing this.
I'll just keep doing this. And that's great.
Right.
It's very intellectually appealing. It's just not. It's
not reality.
It's not reality for most people.
Yeah. 100%. I feel like that. The nonlinear part of it. I used to think, so I've been a very nonlinear person my entire life. I grew up overseas in the Philippines. I started company out of college out of necessity while I'm parking cars and washing windows. I did a very atypical path. I had a record label at one point, I had a clothing brand. And I used to think that was a disadvantage. I kind of felt like I was like an unorthodox, like, kind of guy.
Yeah.
And then I had this picture recently. I was talking to my wife because I was like, I've just been like, frankly, wrestling with how to articulate my story because it like doesn't follow a linear path. And I'm actually in this like B2B sales accelerator right now with Jesse Puggi, who's a really great guy. He started Ampush, sold to Red Ventures. Anyway,
cool.
been hanging out with him and a bunch of other folks. And they've been like pushing like how to tell your story. And I'm like, man, like I keep feeling like I'm banging my head on the wall. Like I'm like, I don't know how to tell my story. Like it doesn't make sense. It's all over the place. And I had this bit of a breakthrough with my wife. She was like I kind of got frustrated one night and I was like, I don't know, I can't tell a stupid story. And like, everything I've done has been unorthodox, but I've like grown and like done a bunch of shit because of it.
Yeah.
And she was like, that's it. Like
That's the story.
Yeah. Like your unorthodox way of doing this is actually like a superpower. And, they're not like, I don't know if you Manny Pacquiao, I don't know if you're like a boxer fan. So grew up in the Philippines. That dude was like a legend, right?
Yeah, he's a legend anywhere
Yeah,
in the world.
yeah, right. But he's like a southpaw, he kind of goes, he boxes unorthodox. And, kind of just in my mind, I was like, okay, like choosing to lean into the unorthodox nature, the non-linear path can be a superpower, and I think there's a lot of folks who they think they got to go down the certain path. Like I got to, I have to start as an entrepreneur and end as an entrepreneur. I got to start in corporate and work up the ranks and I got to end as and I got to get the whatever. And it's like, no, like,
I think there's nothing wrong if somebody chooses that path, but I think a lot of it depends on your personality, I guess. My dad had one job coming out of University of Virginia. He retired. He just climbed the corporate ladder, and he's perfectly happy with it. Me, it's hard to imagine me being successful doing it that way. I'm just a very different person. But I do think that it's that sitting back and reflecting on your past, and I think coming up with your story is very important. I think it's one of the most important things when you start a company, and if you're the one starting it, your story is the company's story. I think figuring that out is how you build culture, and it's how you build brand, and I think just the very act of going through that and actually being reflective, I think helps most people. For me, I don't look at things and say, where do I want to be in 10 years, 15 years, 20 years, because I just can't think that way. But I know very successful people who do, and that's what they do. Okay, I'm going to stick to my plan and I'm going to keep going. But you heard me talking about the way I think products should be developed is a lot more try something, see what works. If it didn't work, change it.
Test and learn.
Keep going until you figure it out.
Eventually
you'll get it right, or you'll shut it down, and I've shut plenty of companies down. And that's another part. I think that all through school you're taught that failing is bad. We call it failing. And you get a bad grade, and we're taught that it's awful. And there was nothing I feared more than coming home with less than a B on my report card. And that's good in some ways, right? But I also think that it does a major disservice, because the way you really learn is by failing. And I think we all know that, but it's still, it's just hard for most people to embrace that part of it, or to admit. And if you've seen people cling to pet projects inside of companies, it's because the reputation, whether they're right or they're wrong, usually I think they're right, the reputational hit you'll take for failing at something, you may never recover from it. I think that to be a successful entrepreneur, or anything, Manny Pacquiao, if he was afraid of getting his ass kicked, he would have never been able to fight the way that he did, right? But I'm sure he took ass kickings on the way up.
He definitely did.
But I think that a lot of our systems that were created for good reasons do a disservice to us, because we become paralyzed by like, oh, what if I fail?
Yep. I think there's like
pick myself up and try it again.
Right. I think that's the mindset thing, right? Like there's very few things in life that are truly irreversible. Right? Like changing your job, going out on jumping and going and try to build something, like you can always make more money, and I know that sounds like probably pretty flippant, but having been, I mean, I was on food stamps when I first started and trying to figure out how to pay bills or whatever. You can make money. Like you can, if you have that attitude of just like, I'll figure it out and not, I love what you're saying with the whole like try things, learn things. Like I have this tattoo on my arm. It says, do the next right thing. And that's like how I approach everything. I don't try to lay out some big master plan or some big 5-10 year strategy. Like obviously there's value in long-term thinking, but I think you also, none of us know what the future holds. And I think if your attitude is, I'm going to go in, I'm going to figure it out, I'm going to learn as I go, and be willing to kind of like roll with the punches, flow like water, whatever metaphor you want to use there.
No, I use roll with the punches all the time.
Yeah.
Because you get punched. It's just a fact of life. And you can either choose to cry about it or you
can
maybe you try to call the cops about it, or maybe you just, hey, I'm going to roll with it and let it cause minimal damage to my life, and hopefully I'll learn something from it.
Yeah, wipe the blood off and keep going.
Yeah, exactly.
Right. Well, so as we wrap up, like I'd love to give you an opportunity to, one, share like what's a takeaway you want folks on the, who are listening to grab a hold of if they don't remember anything else. And then two, just, where folks can find you online.
Sure, absolutely. So I'm on Twitter. I'm not very active. I mostly read on Twitter. But I'm JSB713. You can go to defiancedigital.com is our website. And you can follow us on LinkedIn as well, Defiance Digital. We're pretty committed to putting out solid content, which we're still maybe a year and a half into that effort, but we see that people like what they're reading, and the audience grows. And so hopefully if you're in the world of DevOps or cybersecurity or cloud infrastructure, definitely check us out. And we do events with other entrepreneurs like yourself as well, but all of that gets updated on LinkedIn. I think in terms of our discussion around corporate and going out on your own, I think the biggest thing I hope people take away when they talk to people who have gone out and done it on their own is the realization that there isn't any one path or one way to do it. Yeah, exactly. And my mindset was always, I was never a job hopper who, I wasn't going and doing interviews in the lead up to my review. Let's just put it that way. I always looked at it as, am I learning right now? Am I meeting my basic needs? Can I put food on the table? Can I pay my rent? Can I pay for my car? Can I have the lifestyle that I want? But what was more important was, what am I learning? Mm-hmm. And if you feel like you're stuck in an environment, in a corporate environment, and you're not learning, I think that is one of the right reasons to go out and do it on your own, because you will learn a lot. You may lose every penny that you've got. You may, you may convince a whole bunch of people to either invest in your business or come work for you, and you fail. Like that is a reality that I think everybody knows. But there is no question that you will learn if you go out on that journey. And I think just having an open mind about it. But I think being realistic, what do I really want? I think a lot of people think they want to go to a startup, and I've even said go work for a startup throughout this interview, but the reality is there are a lot of ways to do things that are to put yourself in a more entrepreneurial type of setting. I think most people, when they say I want to go work for a startup, they really mean I want to go work for a company that's raised a Series B and has a line of sight to a Series C, because that's exciting, that's fun. That's not necessarily where you're going to be on the ground floor. It's not where you're going to make a fortune doing it, but they're great learning environments, and I think that's a good first step for a lot of people. I also think that there are a lot of events and things going on in the community that you can get involved with while you're in a corporate environment. I don't think that they're as good of learning experiences as going and doing something, going and working, on an entrepreneurial endeavor. But there are. I tell people all the time, go check out Pitch Breakfast, for instance, here in Charlotte. That's a great starting point. You'll meet. You really probably need to know 50 people in all of the Charlotte ecosystem to really be able to get to anybody. And those 50, you could probably you could start on the path by going to 3 or 4 pitch breakfast events. But there's lots of other great events. Charlotte Angel Fund, I believe that they'll let people come sit in on some of their pitch events where investors are actually, or people are coming in and actually pitching to their investors. So I would encourage people, if you're thinking about it, again, the number one thing you can do is go work for an entrepreneurial company where you can add value. But failing that, there are lots of other things that you can do to kind of get exposed and to see what is something else that maybe I want to write the next chapter of my book based on.
Yeah. John, this has been awesome. Thank you for being on the show. I appreciate it, man.
Thanks for having me, man.
Yeah,
I really appreciate it.
So, folks, you can find me drewburdick.com or at Drew H. Burdick pretty much on every social channel. Going to be doing more of these podcast episodes. If you haven't already, click subscribe, like all the things on YouTube, Spotify, Apple Podcasts, all of that. And if you have a desire or an interest to be on the show, or if you have anything that you think you would be interesting to talk about, shoot me a note. Thanks, y'all.
Thanks, Drew.